Okay, so thank you very much, Robin. Robin is, as she said, this is part of a project that was funded by Office of the Great Barrier Reef and World Heritage, thanks to Megan and Katerina. And I'm going to look at basically the communication angle and the understanding of stewardship and just give a very few kind of brief sort of overview, but obviously happy to chat afterwards. Before I do, though, I'm currently on Ngunnawal country down in the ACT, and I pay my respects to the elders and traditional owners, and also for the Bindal and Wulgurukaba country. So, as Robin's just said, norms are basically the ways, the perceptions of what others typically do in their actions and their stewardships, and injunctive social norms are the way people are perceived or consider a desirable state. So when we get a text or we get a piece of newspaper, if you like, old school, or a website, we have different social norms, and within that, the descriptive ones are kind of what people do in their actions, and the injunctive ones are people will maybe put like a political lens on it, or they may put a certain perception, whether it's a positive or a negative. So what we're trying to do is kind of break that down and see effectively who is leading the narrative and who is kind of shaping those norms within the context of reef water quality. And we do that through artifacts, which are these visible symbols. So in the case of media and communication, it's things like X, Facebook, social media platforms, Twitter, or X, podcasts, newspaper articles. And we actually, in this case, focus particularly on rural artifacts. So things like the ABC Radio Rural Programme, which goes out at around 5 a.m., targeting farmers, things like the ABC Landline, the newspapers like the North Queensland Register, those that really are kind of targeting the sort of rural and regional areas. And the same with sort of media reports as well. And artifacts reflect both these existing norms, but they also help to define them and help to kind of perpetuate them. And that can be through like the actors who we see in these reports, or the communicator, or even the scale, the geographical scale. So we analyze these stewardship related norms across these 9 predefined attributes. And we did this through a way in which I'm not going to linger on this one because Robin has just talked about it. But basically, we analysed them, identified the sources, looked at the norms, looked at confirm them, described them, and then summarised them and shared the findings, which is the bit we're at now. Headlines really are, and I'll break this down in the next few slides, that stewardship related norms are primarily communicated through media and industry sources. And the main media one was really about, was the Courier Mail. We need to do a little more digging in the data, which Angie's offered to do, and to see whether some of those, not Daily Mail, sorry, Courier Mail, Daily Mail's a different thing altogether, maybe, the Courier Mail, and whether some of those articles were actually syndicated, because often within the News Corp portfolio, they will syndicate stories across all of those newspapers, particularly in Queensland. We did actually find that the government sources produce fewer norms than other producer types, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And that's not a surprise because we found this in previous work going back 5 years. So there really is not much change. We can make some sort of suggestions here that governments are still staying within the sort of website area, and they're not using those primary communicators of the others, which you can see in the top. And we also know that the balance between descriptive and injunctive norms are going to influence stewardship communication, and they predominantly have been coming from the industry sources. So those norms were often, as an example, used as a kind of trusted voice, or a farmer being interviewed, and a regular person, somebody that people become familiar with. As far as the reef goes, just a bit more drilling down into what Robin has said. So in our sample, in our huge sample, the reef was referred to only 15% of the cases. We found that water quality was only 1 in 10, and this was used by government and NGOs. And also stewardship was less than 2% of the identified norms. So while it was not widely adopted, it did appear equally in the communications. And so this tells us that there's a couple of things going on here, that the stewardship is not a prominent idea. So people are not getting that information, whether it be a subjective or objective. They're not getting much of a kind of normative position within the sort of stewardship. So it's not part of the narrative. It's not up there really sort of high, if you like. So, and sort of give you an example of where that's sort of being produced as well. You'll find that we can see here in this slide that we've got the general media are the producer types, but they're not, from those earlier things, talking about reef. They're not talking about water quality, and they're not really talking about stewardship. We also can see here that industry association, there is a much higher percentage in those two, which are using that injunctive, that more sort of subjective approach. I just wanted to show you this slide as well by who is doing the communicating. And again, industry very high around the injunctive, but I also wanted to point out, that you can see in there Indigenous First Nations, there is hardly any recognition in the data that we have. So again, that's something that we want to go back to and drill down. And that's partly because potentially Indigenous publications, Indigenous specific, like the Korai Mail, but we need to look further into that. So I'm rushing along because I want to get to the kind of what it means and what it looks like. So we found that government agencies often work on water quality improvements. They're staying within websites. So websites are just the main focus. And those websites, as we all know, we have our favorite bookmark websites where probably there's potentially there only traffic going in a certain direction. It's also, and we've done this in earlier work where we know that those websites don't create that feedback loop, whereas something like, social media, people are quite open to giving feedback. So that's one kind of strategy that could be looked at. The industry and NGOs are using that idea of a trusted voice to enhance credibility and build trust within the community. So often using someone well known, particularly women. We've noticed a little bit that there's a gender focus there, where women are maybe being quoted and interviewed more often. And so again, all of this community voices, trusted voices, builds that kind of that level of how we interpret norms and social norms. The other problem as well, or not problem, some governments use a vague terminology, and it's often a barrier to communication. So a classic example of that is government tend to use the words like water quality. Not all government departments, but some use the term water quality. If you ask somebody general, and other research has been done on this, water quality is often seen as a drinking water, so that kind of vague terminology is becoming a bit of a barrier in a way. And this accessibility also means that often government are relying on that bureaucratic terminology that doesn't really resonate with the media or with farmers. And so the other example would be like farmers prefer more specific terms like 6 easy steps, say for fertilizer management, or so avoiding vague terminology and using more precise descriptions is one of our recommendations, such as things like fencing riparian areas rather than improving water quality, and the framing of messages around farm benefits and environmental outcomes, which again, lots of previous work has shown. So this means things aren't moving on, they're not changing, has shown that, talking about that bottom line in a way, supporting the farm, supporting nature, may also address that issue of polarization, which also could link to why some communicators like governments are possibly not looking at social media because of things like, what Carly Lubix and Greta have talked about around this sort of climate denial machine, and getting the whole thing becomes really polarized, binary, and very, very messy. The other one is also to increase visibility of policy instruments that promote positive norms. Again, Rachel Everhart's done quite a lot of work on this, and Karen Vella as well. So having that kind of build-in of the trust, and using those kind of those roles, those kind of policy instruments, while you have things like voluntary measures also, is another way that communication can come through. Okay, so I'm just about out of time. I do have to dash, it's bang on 12. I just want to say a very thank you to our funders, University of Queensland, all the people that participated. One thing we didn't mention in the method, we interviewed 21 people to test the data that was both tested by the LLM, the large language model, and the AI, and also the humans. So thank you to the 21 people, the steering committee, Paul, Sam and Robin, who had to do all the hard work coding the data, and of course the social science for the Reef Symposium Committee. I am heading off now, so I won't be around for questions and answers, but do drop me an email, and Tracy is circulating so she can answer questions too. Thank you.